everyone. Welcome back to Spoils of War. I hope that you are enjoying the story. We are almost to the end. There's just one more chapter and the story will close. And so I hope that you have found pleasure in this romantic tale. And today, let us see where chapter 4 will lead us.
Think about me one more time before you go. Someday you'll know. Someday you'll know. I already know what I'm going to say. I've been feeling this way for far too long. And now you're gone. Took me away from all of my fears. Kept me away from all of my tears. Now you're gone. And now I'm lost.
1954. Mayna woke to the sound of birds chirping and yawned, stretching her tired limbs. She turned to her side and saw Pao sleeping soundly. A smile formed on her face. She pushed herself to sit up and started looking for food. She walked onward down a crooked path and came upon a field of sugar cane. She broke 4 and brought them back to where they were camped. When she returned, Pa was up and examining his wound. As she handed him the sugar canes. Look what I found. Bet we'll have to use our teeth to break it. Here, let me do it, he offered. He broke the sugar cane with his teeth and handed one over to her. She took it and started chewing, the sweetness of it rolling on her tongue. She looked up at the clear sky and felt the moist from last night's rain in the air. It was quiet, and the air had this aroma that made her want to continue smelling. What happens now? Mayna asked. Pao spit out the chewed sugar cane and looked up. We go to the Thai police station and they'll take us to a village. Once there, we can start our life. Mayna smiled as he winked at her. They finished the sugar cane. Bellies were now full as they marched onward. The air was hot and the sun was out, causing Mayna to sweat profusely and Pao's wound to leak out blood. They continued onward until they reached a small creek. There she washed his wound and rebound it with a new fabric to keep it clean from infection. They drank and cleared their dry throats before they moved forward. When afternoon hit, the sun had shifted and gave them some cool air. As they moved along the jagged paths of the forest, Mayna thought of their life together in Thailand. Would they be a happy family? How many children would they have? She felt a heart beat against her chest and a smile formed on her lips. Never in her life did she think she would live to feel this kind of love. Mayna watched as he walked ahead of her, his back muscles rippling before her. He used his strong arms to bend the branches that threatened to attack them both. She smiled, her heart knowing what kind of man lay beneath that exterior. But the warmth of the thought disappeared when she heard the sound of gunfire coming close by. She stopped as Pao turned around and stared at her, fear rising in his dark eyes. He put a finger to his lips. Don't make a sound, he whispered as he reached out his hand for her. She took it with a shaking hand and he pulled her toward him. She felt his strength protect her. Swallowing hard, she watched as fear danced across his eyes, and then the gunfire was heard again, this time closer than before. We have to go, he whispered. They ran through the thick forest, cutting through the broken leaves and dangling branches. The heat came back to life as they ran through the twisting maze of the angry jungle trees. Once, Mayna tripped over a log and fell, her head slammed into a jagged rock, splitting her skin open. When Pao helped her up, her world spun and she saw stars, but she knew time wasn't on their side, so she forced herself to run as the gunfire got closer. Panting, she ran with him as blood ran down her face, blinding her sight. If we make it to the station, we can be safe, Pao cried. She nodded and instantly regretted it, for it sent her into a haze of spinning circles. She felt her strength drain as the heat tortured her wound. She fought to keep up with him, when Pao came to a sudden stop. He held out both his arms to stop her, and when she saw what was in front of them, Her heart lurched into the pit of her belly. 4 men stood with rifles, armed and loaded, ready to blow them off. Shaking, she began panting hard, fear riding in her. We were supposed to be safe, she thought as the first man stepped forward and smiled at them. You can't escape this horror. You should learn to give in. It is useless to run when you have nowhere to go, he said in his foreign tongue. If you hand over the woman, you can live. Mayna looked from one to the other as they continued talking. It wasn't until they pointed at her that she realized what they wanted. They laughed as they stepped forward, forcing them to back up. When the tip of their guns pointed at Pao's chest, Mayna pushed him aside and stepped forward. What are you doing? Pao cried as 2 guns shifted into his direction. The leader of the group smiled as he came to touch a strand of her hair. He lifted it and sniffed it. It's been a long time since I've smelled beautiful. Pao looked at her, and when he tried to come forward, they jabbed their gun into his chest. Mena, what are you doing? He'll kill you or worse. She shook her head. If I don't go, he'll kill us both. At least this way you can live. If life is to be lived without you, then I don't want it. I'll let him kill me right here, right now. Just let me go with him. No, he shouted. One of the guns jabbed deeper into his chest, and he turned his eyes on them as Mayna noticed the knife sticking out from the leader's waistline. He took a deep breath and walked forward to him. His smile widened as she inched closer to him, and she heard Pao's angry screams at her. She wrapped her arms around him, and as he leaned down to kiss her, she reached into his waistline and pulled out the knife. She took a swing, and the knife slashed across his flesh, splicing his face all the way across. Blood sprayed against her face as the others turned to look at her actions. Pao grabbed the gun from one of them and fired a shot into their heads. When the leader looked up at her, she took the dagger and entered it through his skull, and heard the sound of his flesh ripping through the knife. Pao fired, and the smoke from the gun evolved into the air as pieces of brain splattered across the leaves. Blood slowly dripped down, like the rain that had come from the night before. Mena stood there, covered in blood, and started breathing as she looked up at Pao. He dropped the gun and ran to her, hugging her tight with all of his strength. She didn't know when, but when she started crying and shaking with so much fear, he pulled away and began wiping the blood off of her face with his hands. Never do that again, Mayna. Are you crazy? He cried. She sobbed. I wanted to save you. What is life without you? If I can't have you, then I'd rather not live. It was later in the evening when they reached the police station. They were hungry, tired, and wounded as they entered. There they were given food, water, and some medical care. The man, sitting behind the desk, had dark hair and a mustache and wore a green uniform. He sat there with a pencil behind his ear and a cup of coffee steaming beside him. He had introduced himself as Tom Cody. Do you know anyone who I can call? He asked. It surprised Mayna when Pao spoke perfect Thai. No, we don't know anyone. We barely made it across the river. He sighed and rubbed his eyes. If you know no one, then I'll send you to the refugee camp. There you will find some shelter and food. There are lines here that you cannot cross. If you do, I am not responsible for the harm that comes to you. I understand, sir. They spent the night in the station with warm blankets, and for the first time, Mayna was able to sleep soundly, no longer jerking awake to the sound of gunfire and fear that she would lose her life. Beside her, Pao held her as he slept, finding his own deep peace from a long, tragic battle.
You know it still hurts a little bit, but not that much. 'Cause if you want somebody else, who am I to judge? I've been thinking about you all the time, but that's alright. I'm starting to get used to it, think I'll survive. I met you in the summer, when you left it was cold. Said we loved one another, guess that we were wrong. I met you in the summer, our love was out of control. I've been going crazy without you, I'm so alone. I met you in the
Present. Pa Kou saw her standing there with a dozen white roses in her hand, and it took everything she had to walk onward. The wind was quiet today, unlike her roaring heart. When she reached her husband's grave, Mayna looked up at her with teary eyes. Avoiding them, Pa Kou placed the white roses on his grave and then knelt down to touch the dirt. She sat there and tears filled her eyes as she drew circles on the earth. Somehow that comforted her. Would you rather I not be here? Mei Na asked. Pa Kou answered without looking up at her. You are a part of him that I can't touch. What right do I have in ordering you to leave? You know you can just say the words and I'll go. She stood up. I could, but I can't find myself doing it. You belong to him in a way that I can't seem to interfere. His hold on you is stronger than his hold on me. It seems that even though he loved me, he also loved you too. He may have, but it doesn't account for what he gave you, she said. Both women became quiet as the wind whistled around them. Then when Mei Na spoke next, it sent a sorrowful tune to her heart. I was married to a very abusive man. He claimed he loved me, and when I started seeing his evil side, I even defended him. And then one day when I woke up and realized how wrong I was, it was already too late. The bruises, the hurt, and the pain didn't go away just because he said he was sorry. I used to dream of escaping back to Pao's arms. Pa Kou watched her eyes fill up with tears. How did you and Pao get separated? An attack on the village. I was with him when we ran, but in the midst of running, something happened. We had promised that we would meet at the bus to come to America. We both had our interviews. We were both ready to come to a world of peace and harmony. I made him promise that if we got separated, if we found out what happened to the other, we'd find each other no matter what. But we never saw each other again. Until I saw your TV commercial asking for donations to help cure your husband's tumor. When I saw his face, I knew instantly it was him. There isn't a day that goes by that I wouldn't recognize him. You could burn him alive and I'd still know it was him. A face like his, you couldn't forget it. It's engraved into my mind forever, and no matter how many years go by, I'd still know it was him. Pa Kou sniffed and tried to hide her pain as she turned away from the other woman. She slowly lifted her eyes and stared at Mei Na, and the moment that she did, she found more pain enter her soul. The woman was practically beautiful in every way. Even now as she stood here, vulnerable and fragile, she had a beauty about her that spoke deeply, a beauty that Pa Kou wished she had. There's so much about you that gives me a reason to believe he could never let you go, Pa Kou whispered. Mei Na turned her oval face toward her. What are you talking about? You have this strength about you that I never did. You're so beautiful in all your ways, and when I look at you, I find myself mad with envy. You are the true essence of a woman, the true essence of what he would want. You know that's not true, she said. Pa Kou laughed. Isn't it? All these years in my life, I try to make myself more than what I ever was to hold on to him. I told myself that if I proved to him that I was more than what I appeared to be, he'd love me. But the more I tried, it seemed the less interested he was. Now I know the reason for it all. I could never measure up to the one woman who still held his heart. You were the one who held the key to his soul. And I was just a locksmith who had a copy that didn't quite fit right. The night was quiet as Pa Kou lay in bed listening to the wind blow outside a window. The tree branches cast an evil haunting ghost on the white walls as her eyes darted back and forth. The howling of the wind was like that of a wolf, mean and lost, almost looking for food. She shivered and pulled up the blankets to her chin. She turned her head, and to her amazement, she saw Nabal's figure emerging from the dark closet. She sat up, stunned and surprised as he walked into the moonlight. She watched as his handsome face lit up. He wore a white shirt with black pants, his hair combed back neatly, and the paleness of his face was replaced by a healthy glow. She started crying as he slowly made his way to the edge of the bed and sat down. She heard the bed creak under his weight, and she struggled to move toward him, the blanket twisting her feet together. When she finally did reach out, he smiled and took her hand. Very slowly, she pulled her hand to his, and a tear fell down her cheek. Nabal, is that really you? She whispered softly. Smiling, he replied, I'm here to keep the ghosts away from you. I know how you hate to sleep alone when the nights are haunting like this. Sobbing, she moved closer, and her hands ran up his arms, feeling the skin that she knew so well. She ran her hands up to his face and cupped his cheeks. His eyes smiled back at her, and she pulled him in for a kiss. When their lips touched, she felt a spark ignite between them, and when she pulled away, he smiled at her and brushed her hair back gently with his fingertips. Where did you go? I have missed you so much. He wiped her tears and touched her cheek. I've been here the whole time, keeping you safe, Pa Kou. Then why haven't I felt you? You're feeling me now, aren't you? Let's get you to bed. She crawled back in, and he slipped in beside her, holding her waist. She turned and nuzzled her neck into the cradle of his arms, smelling his faint male scent. She reached up and touched his face, smiling, and for once in a long time, she slept soundly, unafraid of the ghost trying to enter the window of her bedroom. The morning light spilled into the room as Pa Kou lazily yawned and stretched, and then suddenly she remembered last night, and she sat up, her heart beating loudly as she let out uneven breaths. She swung her legs over the bed and ran to the closet, turning on the lights. Her eyes scanned it for any signs of him inside. When she realized it was empty, her heart sank. She began to cry when her eyes fell on the neatly lined shirts that once embraced his body. She felt herself shake with violence as she stood up and slowly took a shirt off the hook. She placed it around her body and inhaled the scent that once decorated hers. Pa Kou wept into the sleeves, imagining his arms holding her. Even then, her pain didn't disappear. Hours later, she sat in the afternoon light in the living room, watching the clouds pass by, the shirt wrapped around her sunken body. Her eyes were red and swollen, her mouth was dry, and her throat was scratchy. But even then, the pain of not seeing him made her feel all that much worse. She watched as the couple pushed a stroller past the window. As she closed her eyes, images of the past already filling her mind. When she opened her eyes, she saw a shadow cross into the kitchen, and a wave of cool air brushed against her body. Pa Kou got up and walked into the kitchen, and found him standing there by the doorway looking at her, dressed in his black suit, the one she had buried him in. She brought up her shaking hands to cover her quivering mouth, and words caught at the base of her throat. Nepal stood there with his eyes as dark as when he was alive, his lips as full and sensual as when he used to kiss her. His hair was brushed back neatly, and his skin was full of color and a healthy glow. She watched as he took several steps toward her, and when he neared her, his scent tickled her nose. She reached out a shaking hand, and he took it, pulling her closer to him. Are you real? She asked with a shaky voice. Smiling, he replied, I am as real as you are, my love. You're wearing my favorite shirt. Tears burst into her eyes as she threw her arms around him and held him. She inhaled his scent and breathed life into her fragile body again. And when she pulled away to look at him, she saw the love burning in his eyes. She reached up a finger and caressed his cheek. I am lost without you. Life is intolerable without you. How am I supposed to go on when every day I think of nothing but you? Last night in your arms was the only night that I got any sleep at all, she cried. He smiled and ran a hand through her hair. You've lost weight. You must keep yourself healthy, Pa Kou. How? I'm always here with you. When you look into the clouds, I'll be there. When you hear a song on the radio, it's me singing it for you. I'm the hand that ticks on the clock that tells you a new hour has come by. I'm the sound you hear when you wake in the morning. I'm the light that spills in the room when you sleep. I'm the blanket that keeps you warm at night. When you shower, I am the water that runs down your body. When you lather up your body with soap, it is me you're holding against your skin. I haven't gone anywhere without you, Pa Kou. Every day I live here with you, and every day I find some little ways to make you see and feel me. Pa Kou sniffed, and tears gushed down her face. She shook her head and looked at him with trembling lips. That's just what frightens me, Nepal. You're everywhere, yet I can't see you. I want you here where I can feel you. You do feel me. You just don't know it's me. I'm always here. Pa Kou slipped her arms around him and held him as she lay her head against his chest. Do you know how much I love you? Do you know how much I've had to endure since you've gone? Every day it is a struggle to live and breathe, and every day when I wake up alone in that big bed, I find it harder and harder to face the day. My heart can't take much more of this. He pulled away and cupped her face. When you want me, come visit me where you lay me. I'll be there waiting for you. I must go now. No, 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 no. Wait, 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 wait. I love you. Pa Kou watched as he took several steps back and smiled at her, and then slowly walked out the back door. She rushed out and found everything empty. Once again, she fell to the ground and wept.
Think about me one more time before you go. Someday you'll know. Someday you'll know. You already know what I'm going to say. I've been feeling this way for far too long.
Thailand. The wind bent the rice fields as the hot sun played against Maina and Pao's back as they worked in the garden. The light breeze wasn't enough to keep the sweat from forming on their faces and neck. The lush green mountains stood high before them, showing them that the world they once knew was now long gone, and the freedom they so envied were now at their hands. Maina stopped and raised a hand to wipe the sweat from her forehead, feeling tired as Napal stopped and walked to her. Let us rest before we continue. It's too hot, he said. They both walked to the small hut Pao had built and sat under the shade, feeling the coolness already fulfill them. Maina reached into the bamboo basket and pulled out the rice and chicken she had made this morning. She took out the banana leaves and tore off a leg for Pao and one for herself. Can you believe that we're here? She asked. Pao chewed and shook his head. No. In my dreams, I'm still fighting a war. I'm running and I can't escape. I'm sure there won't be a day that it will end. It will end when I find peace for everyone, he whispered. They finished eating, and as Maina cleared up the food, Pao grabbed her hand and pulled her close to him. She watched as his eyes filled with softness, and a sense of love filled her. She reached up and tucked a lone strand of hair back into place. He leaned forward and kissed her gently as she caressed his cheeks. When he pulled away, she watched as his face filled with love. Through that long run for freedom, all I knew was that if I got us here, I'd have some kind of peace for myself. You were the only thing that mattered to me. There's so much I want to give you, Maina. Life is full of such happiness and love. You never know when you will leave this world, and if you don't spend it wisely, when you do go, you'll leave behind a mountain of regrets. I have such visions for us. I want things for you that no one else could get. I don't want you to envy anyone else in this world. I want others to envy you. When I look at you, I see such a rare beauty that makes me wonder if life itself is even real. Do you realize that these kind of feelings rarely ever speak to me? Maina smiled and she reached for his hand. What you speak of, I've never felt or known until I found you. Every day that I'm with you, I find myself closer to all of my dreams that I ever dreamt. You make me complete, and everything you do or say is chiseled into my heart forever. Our interviews for America have been finalized, and tomorrow when the bus arrives, we'll leave this place for a land where we can make our wildest dreams come true. In America, we can have a house, children, a place of our own. We won't need anyone else in the world. I know I don't. Maina stopped smiling and she sighed deeply. A lot can happen between now and tomorrow. He took her hands and kissed her knuckles. I'll tell you this much, Maina. If something should happen, you run for that bus, and you make sure you get on it. She opened her mouth to speak, but he stopped her. I'm serious. You make sure you get on that bus no matter what happens. Maina shook her head. No, not without you. Pao grabbed her arms and gave her a light shook. You will get on that bus with or without me, Maina. I found you once before. and I'll do it again. I promise you that. Early morning light spilled into the thin hut that Maina and Pao shared as she stirred. She woke and found him sleeping soundly beside her. Smiling, she got up and took the basket to gather water. As she bent down, a loud thud shook the ground and tipped her over. Maina slammed against the cold, hard ground as Pao sat up and rushed to her side. They both stood up quickly and opened the door to find the villagers screaming and running as a thick black smoke rose in the field not far away. Run! A woman cried, running past them. Run for your lives! Maina's face broke into terror as Pao grabbed her hand and they both fled toward the hills, toward where the bus would be. She turned back around and saw Thai soldiers with guns blazing into their village. Screams were heard as bullets ricocheted past and the bodies dropped like flies. She forced herself to look away and focused on running past the many people trying to flee for their lives. Maina watched as small children cried for their mothers. She saw a young toddler crying and she reached down to pick her up, but a bullet grazed across the child and blood sprayed against Maina's face. She screamed as Pao grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the hills where hundreds of people were fleeing. When they reached the grass hills, the rocks cut into her feet, making it harder for her to run. The gun firing was closer, and every now and then a bomb exploded, sending everyone to the ground for seconds before they were able to get up again. Past the grass hill, they came across a field of sugar cane, and as they ran through the thick hide, the canes bounced back and slapped them in the faces. Maina caught one in her cheek as she lost her breath for a few seconds before she was able to continue. When she did finally continue on, she realized Pao was no longer at her side. She turned around and weaved back through the thick canes and found him lying on the ground. A sugar cane had broke and pierced through his left thigh. Oh my God, Pao, she cried as she reached out to help him. What are you doing here? Run, go, he cried as he shoved her away. She bent down and touched his wound. No, not without you. I can't go without you. I'll never live. Pao grabbed her shoulders and gave her a light push. Maina, you run, and you don't look back. Do you hear me? I'll find you, I promise. You run and you get on that bus. Under no circumstances do you stay here. Do you hear me? Now go. She shook her head as tears filled her eyes. No. Maina, if you love me, you will go. And if you love me, you won't let me go alone. He grabbed her face. I'll slow you down with my injury. I promise that I will find you. He kissed her. Go! Maina broke into tears as she stood up and started backing away. She could hear the gunfires coming closer. You find me, Pao. You promise that you find me. I promise, Maina, I'll find you, and I'll make you the happiest woman on earth. I love you with all of my heart. I found you once before, and I'll do it again. Do you promise me? She cried. Pao smiled. With all of my heart. Thank you for tuning in. Chapter 5 will be out shortly.
Think about me one more time before you go. Someday you'll know. Someday you'll know. Already know what I'm going to say. I've been feeling this way for far too long.